as all of you know, is Renegades, Cutthroats, and Cannibals, Chico and beyond. It is a tale of wilderness, of predation, and self-preservation. Like snowstorms, avalanches, tarantulas, and rattlesnakes, outlaws were once viewed as part of the natural environment. What we are going to do this morning is explore a unique set of survival skills. These are tactics which allowed our pioneer forebears to address those human hazards which lay hidden and waiting in the California outback. Starting with local Indian troubles, we will advance to accounts of bandidos, stage robbers, and confidence men. Our survey of frontier adversities will conclude with a look at one of California's more complex vicissitudes, an encounter with a cannibal. So let's begin. It is now story time.
Did everybody hear okay?
No.
No, yeah, I thought everybody said yes when I heard it. How's that? Okay. In the late 1850s, a multi-tribal band of renegades established themselves in the foothills of eastern Tehama County. These natives came to be known as the Mill Creek Indians. In 1863, Governor Leland Stanford commissioned John Bidwell as Brigadier General of the 5th Brigade, California State Militia. Founder and leading figure of the community of Chico, the Brigadier treated the issue of the Mill Creeks as a part of his security purview. Bidwell declared the renegades were never seen but as enemies and never approach habitations but to steal and murder. The rugged foothills to the east of Chico include a gorge known as Beery Canyon. One day in July 1863, a resident of Beery Canyon, a 9-year-old by the name of Thankful Lewis, was walking home from school when she was abducted by a party of marauding Mill Creeks. First, the hostiles led their captive away on a westerly course, crossing dusty ridges and climbing through arid ravines. Then the trek took a northerly direction, skirting the edge of the Sacramento Valley. The Indians, whom spoke English, told Thankful they were taking her to their village hideaway, where she would be tortured and then tied to a stake and burned alive. Throughout her ordeal, the young schoolgirl kept her wits and was able to slip away from the raiders at a point near Big Chico Creek. Regarding her captors, Thankful related, "All the time I was with them, I told them I would not run away. I would stay with them and mind them, but I was always on the watch for an opportunity to get away. I did not appear to be much afraid of them. I would run down hills with them and even took a pin and pinned up the shirt sleeve of one of them which was badly torn, and did many little acts that gave them confidence in me. Some people think that was why they did not kill me." Thankful's deceptive complacence led her captors to relax their guard, a mistake which ultimately allowed the girl to escape. This is Thankful Lewis. Her full name was Arena Thankful Lewis, but after her escape from the Mill Creek Indians, her father insisted that she go by her middle name. After that, she was always Thankful Lewis. The multi-tribal Mill Creek Indians were a band composed largely of abused ex-reservation Indians. Mill Creeks hated Euro-Americans. They also hated natives who worked for Euro-Americans. The marauding Mill Creeks were given to capturing, torturing, mutilating and then murdering those whom they detested. I do not care to elaborate on the means Mill Creeks employed to make their captives suffer. Suffice it to say the details were well known and sufficiently gruesome to send shivers down the spines of settlers and natives alike. All right, now this begs the question, what did the Mill Creek Indians look like? What did California Indians in this portion of the state look like? Well, this is Chief Weimar of the Grass Valley Maidu. This is his portrait, which was rendered sometime around 1853. He very much looks like a native of that period. He's wearing a necklace, which includes rectangularly shaped abalone pendants. He's wearing a choker. From the looks of it, it was probably made of white glass beads that he would have obtained through trade with Euro-Americans. He's wearing a net, a hairnet. His hair is tied into a knot behind the hairnet. It's held in place with a very long hairpin. He's also wearing ear ornaments. These are of the type that would have been made of polished wood. So he's representative of what natives would have looked like in the early 1850s. By way of contrast, we move to circa 1860. This is a photograph of natives living on the Round Valley Indian Reservation in Mendocino County. Now, some of them are wearing some of the same kind of regalia that Chief Weimar was wearing. This man right here is wearing an abalone necklace. This man here is wearing a glass bead choker. And this gentleman here is wearing a rather long necklace of what are probably clamshell beads. But of course, the overwhelming impression that we get looking the attire in this photograph is that they've adopted Euro-American attire. The best dressed man in this picture, as far as European attire goes, is this gentleman here, who just happens to be Chief Weimar, formerly of the Grass Valley Maidu, and in this picture, a resident of Round Valley Indian Reservation. So, this is what the Mill Creek Indians would have looked like at the time they captured Thankful Lewis. Interestingly enough, this gentleman is identified as J. Ross Brown. He figures very prominently in the last two segments of this morning's presentation.
Did they shave their faces?
Let's go back to one illustration. He's wearing a mustache. They would pluck their facial hair. But when they became familiar with settlers, it became popular amongst native Californians to grow a mustache. One morning in 1865, a young girl, name unknown, lived on the outskirts of Chico and happened to be home alone when she found a party of armed Mill Creeks in her front yard. She boldly told the Indians to leave and threatened to sick the family dog upon them. In response, one of the hostiles pointed his rifle at the child and snapped a hammer. This induced the girl to go inside and to close and lock the front door. The marauders promptly went to a side of the house, smashed the window, and prepared to enter the dwelling. Unlocking the front door, the girl exited her home and ran to the safety of a neighboring residence. A year earlier, a Mrs. Morgan of Massilley Valley stepped outside her home to collect some firewood. Her husband was away at the time. At the woodpile, the good woman noticed how some resting cows were rising from the ground and looking in the direction of a grove of fruit trees. Turning her gaze in the same direction, Mrs. Morgan could see the head of a man somewhat behind the far edge of the trees. Going inside and up the stairs to the second floor to get a better view, the lady of the house was shocked to see a party of 7 armed mill creeks advancing through the grove toward her home. Having no time to spare, she quickly gathered her 3 small children, and together the mother and siblings hastily exited through the back door. After a mile, all the while keeping a concealing cover of forest between themselves and the marauders, the pioneer woman and her 3 little ones came upon a house. Frustratingly, knocks on the door went unanswered. There was no one at home. Pressing on, after half a mile more, the fugitives came upon another house. There they found a welcome, protection, and relief. The young Chico girl and Mrs. Morgan of Massilley Valley were level-headed, quick-acting individuals whom endured uneasy circumstances. Others, given to screams and panic, would not have fared so well. Composure was a key component of pioneer survival. Let's see now, I think they're a little off here. There we go. In 1869, a gentleman by the name of Stephen Powers, attired in doeskin trousers, frock coat, and a wide-brimmed planter's hat, walked from North Carolina to California. The trek took 10 months and covered some 3,700 miles. Stephen Powers was a journalist and pioneer ethnographer. During the summers of 1872 and 1873, he undertook an investigative survey of the native cultures of his adopted state. His field work among California's Maiduan peoples included interviews of the Machuca Maidu of Chico Rancheria. Powers published the results of his survey in articles for the Atlantic and Overland Monthly magazines. Later, combining his published essays with new findings, he rewrote his research into a single manuscript. Given the title Tribes of California, the monograph was published in 1877 and republished in 1976. Although an ethnographer, Powers was still a product of his particular era. He referred to friendly natives as Indians, and to hostile natives, or potentially hostile natives, as savages. During his survey of California tribes, Powers was habitually prepared for encounters with those less amiable members of his study group. He related, "One means of protection which old pioneers advised me to take was, in journeying any whither, always to keep at my tongue's end the names of several prominent citizens of the vicinity, to impress the savages with the belief that I was well acquainted there, had plenty of friends, and ample means of redress if they did me any wrong." Stephen Powers completed his ethnographic survey without incident. He was surprised by Indians on several occasions, but each time the natives only wanted to know if he had any tobacco he could share. The most annoying thing he had to endure was Indians' repeated request to try on his doeskin pants. Notes. This is a little more sensitive than it's supposed to be. We're going in the wrong direction here. There we go. Robert Allen Anderson, shown here, was a resident of Tehama County and an ardent foe of the Mill Creek Indians. He was commonly addressed as Captain Anderson for his leadership role in renegade suppression. In Upper California, many foothill natives would vacate their summer abodes to winter on reservations or with natives residing in the Sacramento Valley. However, it was believed that at least some Mill Creeks remained in the foothills year-round. Accordingly, one cold and rainy day in December 1859, Robert Anderson found himself in the company of two other Indian fighters. The trio was in the foothills of East Tehama County. Their objective was to locate a hypothetical Mill Creek winter village. Numbed by the inclement weather and trying to dry himself by a campfire, Anderson was jolted by the recollection that he had promised to escort a pair of young ladies to a dance scheduled for the following day. The dance was to be held at Oak Grove on Pine Creek, just above Chico. In those days, local dances featured baskets filled with potluck victuals, fiddle music, quadrilles, and Virginia reels. Attended by young and old alike, these public events often lasted till the stroke of midnight. Anderson left the sodden foothills to attend the dance. The Indian fighter was soon striding along the side of a rocky bluff and nearing the fork of Dry Creek, thinking, he later related, very little of Indians and very much of more agreeable objects when he was surprised by a party of Mill Creeks. The renegades were sheltering in a shallow cave. They saw me as soon as I them, Anderson continued. There was a general scramble among them for their weapons, but while they scrambled, I slid around the point and beat a swift retreat up the next ravine. Luckily, the natives declined pursuit. Daydreaming, Robert Anderson had walked straight into a very close call, a real-life validation of the old Western dictum. Eternal vigilance is the price of safety. Granville Stewart, together with his brother, James Stewart, mined for gold on the Paradise Ridge in 1852. Granville was quite taken with the tall conifer forests, sparkling brooks, and the variety and profusion of flowers which scented his new surroundings. He was also impressed by the local Maidu and related, I thought, in my 18-year-old innocence, that I must unconsciously have strolled into the Garden of Eden, for the good-looking Indians who lived there wore no clothes. There were no fig trees there either. Granville visited the natives' earth-covered lodges, tasted their foods, and admired their skill in hunting with the bow and arrow. Leaving California in 1857, Granville and his brother headed east, an odyssey which ultimately led them to Montana. Both brothers were familiar with the old frontier rule. When you see sign of Indians, be careful. And when you see nary sign of Indians, be more careful. During their eastward passage through Nevada's Humboldt River region, the Stewart brothers took care to put the maxim into practice. Granville explained, "We make a stop, cook our supper, then when it is quite dark, saddle up, travel 5 or 6 miles, and make camp without fire or any noise. In this way we keep out of reach of any prowling bands of Indians." The Stewart brothers employed the art of decoy and systematic stealth to evade potential adversaries. Now this is Granville, age 75. He came to own a cattle ranch in Montana. He married a Paiute girl. Together they had 11 children. Later in life, he served as U.S. minister to Paraguay and Uruguay. Few dangers, human or otherwise, were so chilling as an encounter with Ursus arctos californicus, the once terrifying California grizzly bear. The California grizzly bear, also known as the California golden bear, might stand 8 feet tall and weigh over 900 pounds. Grizzlies have poor eyesight, but a keen sense of smell. Their ability to hear is far superior to that of humans, with an ultrasonic sensitivity similar to that of canines. While humans may run from 12 to 16 miles per hour, grizzlies are able to tromp at 35 miles per hour. The California grizzly had a bite that could crush bones, and the bears could slash prey with 4-inch claws. They were also known to forage in packs. On the coast, the bears were sometimes seen feasting on beached whales. In the mid-19th century, the Sacramento Valley abounded with wild game. In the words of pioneer D.F. Crowder, "I cannot begin to describe the quantity of game that abounded here. Where Chico now stands was a favorite haunt for antelope, and along the foothills and the river bottoms, deer roamed by the hundreds. There were also tule elk, and there were salmon. Salmon runs were once of such magnitude that horses would refuse to ford streams choked with racing chinook." Not surprisingly, California grizzlies were often seen taking game in the Chico portion of the Sacramento Valley. The wily Bruins were observed to have adapted their mode of hunt to take advantage of the valley's unique terrain. The bottom of the Sacramento Valley is often referred to as a level plain. The valley floor is actually contoured with a multitude of shallow swales. California grizzlies were in the habit of concealing themselves in the bottoms of these depressions, laying flat, silent, and unseen below the valley's deceptively flat-looking surface. A California grizzly had only to wait, smell, and listen until a deer or antelope, steer or settler was detected within striking range. Prior to 1849, an estimated 10,000 California grizzlies roamed the Golden State. But over time, the work of hunters and trappers took its toll. The last time a California grizzly was shot was in Tulare County in 1922. The last reliable sighting of a California grizzly was in Sequoia National Park in 1924. Today, the creature is considered extinct. This, however, is not to say the bear has completely dropped from view. Representing a species which once terrorized forest, valley, and coast, a taxidermically preserved specimen of Ursus arctos californicus now captures the attention of visitors at the California Academy of Sciences. Emblazoned on our state flag, the bear proudly prowls the lawns fronting public offices. And lastly, our grizzly is found posing on our state seal in the cozy company of Minerva, the Roman goddess of science, wisdom, and war. Press Longley was born and raised in Tennessee and was a graduate of the University of East Tennessee. He taught school in Texas. An expert shot and horseman, he was also part of a special task force known as the U.S. Rangers. Much of Longley's time in Texas was spent fighting Comanches and renegade veterans of the war with Mexico. Significantly, he also learned to speak Spanish. Longley came to California in 1852 and spent the rest of his life in the company of picks and shovels and pens and inkwells. A miner, a poet, and a story writer extraordinaire, he came to be affectionately known as the Bard of Butte. Much of Longley's career was spent in Butte Creek Canyon. There, he had a cabin not far from the community of Helltown. Today, Butte Creek Canyon is regarded as a part of the greater Chico area. Sometime in the late 1850s, Longley got the impression there were marketable minerals in or near Death Valley. Teaming up with a man named Tom Nash, the two fortune seekers set their sights on Inyo's notorious Badland. Arriving at their destination, Nash and Longley promptly had a falling out. Rather than investigate the margins of Death Valley, Nash wanted to prospect straight down the center of the gorge. It was July. Given the heat and the valley's reputation, Longley viewed the proposal as madness. Nash took their pack mule, some tools, and angrily set out. Press Longley stayed behind and watched. He watched Nash and the mule make their way over the valley's hot, sandy dunes. He watched the man and the beast get smaller and smaller. Finally, the two figures merged into one single speck. Then, reaching the far horizon, the tiny speck vanished behind a flaming wall of sunlight. Tom Nash never returned. Longley made repeated forays into the arid desert in search of his errant partner. But on the 5th day after Nash's exit, the man from Tennessee decided to head back to Butte County. He began to walk. A few miles into his return, our lonely hero was on a wide and well-beaten path when a pair of horsemen appeared on the trail ahead of him. They were banditos, and in addition to their own mounts, they led a third, riderless horse. What happened next is best related in Longley's own words. They came up to within 50 yards of me and halted, then suddenly leveling their guns upon me, ordered me to throw up my hands. I had my revolver, but it was no good against rifles at 50 yards, so I threw up my hands. They then rode up to me, and one of them got down and demanded what money I had. I had $150, which I presented to him, and said, "Tomo, senor," with a smile that was only from my teeth out. The bandito was preparing to remount when Press interrupted him. "My friend," Longley beseeched in Spanish, "could you loan me $10? I am dead broke." Both of the banditos burst into laughter, and Longley's friend handed him $10. Again, in the bard's own words. They then got on their horses and started on. They had gone perhaps 50 yards away from me when they halted again and one of them came back to me with the lead horse. This is the survey party encamped in 1864. This is Mount Diablo in the background. This is the same wagon they would have parked on the Bidwell property. This is the same tent they would have erected on the Bidwell property. During the early 19th century, geologists began to pay close attention to the fossils found in different layers of the Earth's crust. In 1862, William Brewer, a member of Whitney's survey party, examined fossils discovered in a mine north of Orville. "We have," Brewer wrote, "the perfect skull of a horse, extinct species, with the teeth all in, found 35 feet underground. The teeth of elephants, mastodons, tapirs, camels, etc., and a few days ago the underjaw of a rhinoceros, nearly perfect." Whitney published and lectured about fossils and considered fossils essential to an understanding of California's natural history. State legislators viewed Whitney's preoccupation with shells and old bones as a waste of time and funding. Other folks' reaction to Whitney's obsession ranged from mild interest to mirth and levity. An article which appeared in the September 28, 1867 issue of the Weekly Butte Record represents a revealing bit of Whitney-related satire. It concerns a holdup perpetrated by 3 desperados armed with shotguns. Here I quote the newspaper story, which was titled, "A Geologist in the Hands of Highwaymen." Professor Whitney was eased of about $210 by the robbers who stopped the overland coach the other day. While all hands were sitting in a stall in the stable with their hands fast bound, the professor said, "It's a shame for 7 stout men to be thus overcome, bound, and robbed by 3 men." "It does look that way," said Baldy Green, who was sitting opposite him with his hands tied. "It does seem that way, Professor, but what are we going to do about it? I am ready, at the risk of my life, to follow up any move you are ready to make." The professor, ever ready with a theory where rocks and other formations are concerned, had nothing to advance. He only looked upon Baldy and groaned. The fellows with the shotguns were no fossils. That September day, Hosea Whitney no doubt added one simple but clarifying postulate to his collection of theorems. Once confined and fast restrained, the time is well past for a call to action. John Steele, a native of Wisconsin, came overland to California in 1850. His adventures included mining for gold in the Feather River country and close encounters with hostile Maidu in the region of Big Meadows. In the Sierra foothills of the San Joaquin Valley, Steele became acquainted with certain runaway mission Indians. These people practiced an exotic blend of Catholicism and traditional native spirituality. In 1853, Steele decided to return to Wisconsin. His journey home began at Coloma, from which point he proceeded to Uniontown. There, in public, he had a conversation with an uncle who was visiting California. Steele then took a stage to Sacramento. On the stage, he made the acquaintance of what he remembered as a burly, pleasant, and rather well-dressed man. Upon arrival in Sacramento, the two new acquaintances dined together at a local hotel. It is very likely that this amiable, disarming individual had eavesdropped on Steele's Uniontown conversation. Over dinner, he let slip that he knew Steele was a miner and was leaving California. He no doubt also knew it was common for miners, like Steele, to carry gold on their persons. Together, Steele and his new acquaintance boarded a steamer which subsequently docked at the San Francisco wharf shortly after midnight. Taking up their satchels, both men disembarked with the intention of each taking a room at the Atlantic Hotel. Nearing their objective, the two pedestrians could see a lighted room above the street. Steele's sociable companion, who was well acquainted with the city, suggested they go up to the glowing room for a drink. Steele declined the invitation and proceeded to the hotel alone. It was, in retrospect, a fortunate move. The following morning, at the breakfast table, Steele was surprised to learn his absent acquaintance had never arrived at the hotel. According to the morning newspaper, the steamer Sierra Nevada, bound for New York, was accepting passengers. On his way to buy a ticket, Steele encountered the burly, well-dressed man on a busy sidewalk. They recognized one another, and, in passing, the burly man crowded against Steele and suddenly pushed him through a door which was level with the sidewalk. The homebound miner found himself inside a trap, a small square of a room, possibly 6 feet on each side. It was fitted with two interior doors, one to the right and one to the left of the sidewalk entrance. One of the interior doors opened and another man appeared. Reacting quickly, Steele drew a pair of pistols he kept holstered inside his coat. His two assailants promptly disappeared in opposite directions, the two interior doors closing behind them. After taking a moment to regain his composure, Steele stepped outside and hailed a policeman. The constable refused to investigate the incident. John Steele never imagined he might be deceived by a crafty, far-ranging con artist, dodge a den of thugs by turning down a late-night drink, or be thrust into the confines of an indoor ambush. All the same, he came to San Francisco prepared for contingencies. Armed with paired pistols and quick reflexes, Steele negotiated an urban jungle, and on his own terms. Sailor before the mast, beachcomber, sketch artist, and author of some note, California pioneer J. Ross Brown was a study in unforeseeable circumstances. In 1849, Brown was employed as an agent of the U.S. Treasury. That year, one of his assignments was to secure duties on the cargo of a ship which had run aground near San Luis Obispo. The mission would entail a journey through Santa Clara, San Jose, and Salinas. Brown purchased a mule, assembled a light field kit, and set out.
This is a caricature which J. Ross Brown drew of himself. He's somewhere in the American Southwest on a revenue mission.
The trip would be far from smooth. It was while traversing a desolate stretch of outback, south of Soledad, that Brown was thrown from his mule. The animal disappeared, and its owner had no choice but to continue on foot. Just as it was beginning to get dark, our lone civil servant saw the gleam of a fire. Approaching the flickering light, he found himself in a camp, a hideout, inhabited by 3 of the very worst class of criminals. And they had his mule. Brown's reaction was one of complete calm and candor. I have often observed, he later wrote, that men deeply versed in villainy are quick to detect every species of vulgar trickery, but their capacity to cope with straightforward truth is limited. They can analyze well through a dark atmosphere, but, like night birds, have very dim perceptive powers in daylight. When questioned, Brown's account of his circumstances went so far as to include details of his revenue mission and disclose the value of his gold pocket watch. All the same, he remained in the clutches of his deceitfully courteous and designing hosts. His unfamiliar honesty served only to buy time. It so happened that a new member of the gang was experiencing second thoughts about a life of crime. In the wee hours of the following morning, this individual allowed Brown to take his mule and escape. The other 2 villains subsequently gave chase, but not before rewarding Brown's accomplice with a slit throat. His pursuers closing in, Brown barricaded himself in an abandoned adobe. There, in the gloom, he discovered the body of a dead man laying in a pool of blood, a woman with a slit throat, and 2 children apparently killed with a hatchet. Brown had little doubt concerning the identity of those responsible for the murders. The lawless party arrived, and an exchange of gunfire ensued. A lucky shot wounded the outlaw leader, after which the 2 assailants gave up the attack and beat a retreat. One very relieved Treasury agent emerged from the fray unharmed and able to resume his journey. Upon exiting the scene of the shootout, Brown may well have reflected on the way his itinerary had progressed from bad to worse. This downward trend actually began near the start of the journey. After spending the first night of his assignment in San Jose, Brown rode to the crumbling mission of San Juan Bautista. There, he secured lodging for the second night. His room was in an adobe dwelling, which had been converted into a tavern. The tavern was managed by a man and his wife, and it was revealed that the couple were survivors of the Donner Party. Brown had read newspaper accounts of the party of immigrants trapped in the snows of the high Sierras, and how some of the unfortunates had resorted to cannibalism to fend off starvation. He also recalled that his hostess was among those who had subsisted on human flesh. The realization he was lodging in an establishment with a resident cannibal completely discombobulated Brown's overnight stay. Upon meeting his hostess, his impression was one of, quote, an uncommon person, tall, raw-boned, sharp, and masculine, with a wild and piercing expression of eye, and a smile singularly startling and unfeminine. I even fancied that her teeth were long and pointed. She might be the tenderest and best of women, he reasoned, but it was of no avail. When I sat down to supper, Brown continued, this woman was obliging enough to hand me a plate of meat. I was hungry and tried to eat it. Every morsel seemed to stick in my throat. I could not feel quite sure that it was what it seemed to be. The odor even disgusted me. Nor could I partake of the bread she passed to me with any more relish. It was probably made by her hands, the same hands that had torn the flesh from a corpse and passed the reeking shreds to her mouth. The taint of an imaginary corruption was upon it. After supper, Brown retired to his room. He lay in bed racked by a train of horrors which alternated from an irrational fear that his hostess might get hungry during the night to dreams in which the woman's face mingled with the gruesome image of a female ogre. Brown recognized the ogress, a legendary child-eating creature, as something from an illustration in one of his childhood storybooks. So what was J. Ross Brown's remedy for an acute case of cannibal phobia? A morning walk, some fresh air, and a ride out of town. Brown's difficulties at San Juan Bautista were certainly unanticipated. But at the same time, they were nothing unique. Californians recoiled from encounters with Louis Keseberg, another cannibal and Donner Party survivor. In the South Pacific, the famed Norwegian explorer, Thor Heyerdahl, made the acquaintance of a warm and gentle Polynesian elder. Once, in his youth, this particular native had participated in ritual cannibalism. Heyerdahl and the islander shared meals together, and afterward, the Norwegian would reproach himself for experiencing some of the same kind of misgivings which had tormented J. Ross Brown. This is Patrick and Margaret Green, survivors of the Donner Party. And Margaret was the one who so upset J. Ross Brown. Today, the 21st century is not so very different from the 19th century. California, as the 49ers would often say, is where the unexpected happens. We may not be captured by renegades, held up by bandidos, or find ourselves in the hands of cutthroats. But then, metaphorically speaking, on occasion we do indeed find ourselves in just such circumstances. And if the past is any guide, we know what to do. Recognize potential threats, devise appropriate strategies, and keep a sharp lookout. When trouble threatens, retreat if you must, remain composed, and persevere. When cornered, employ truths, be affable, and, if possible, lighten the tension with humor. It can have rewards. Lastly, in those moments when you find yourself in the company of someone who might eat you alive, remember to keep a leash on your imagination. Thank you.